Entitled woman struck Britsh royal guard assuming he'd stay quiet. What followed left everyone stunned. It was a bright, sunny afternoon in London, the kind of day that seemed perfect for tourists to explore the city's historic landmarks. The streets near Buckingham Palace were alive with activity. People had gathered from all over the world, their cameras ready, their eyes wide with excitement, and their voices blending into a lively hum of anticipation. Children tugged at their parents' hands, eager to get a glimpse of the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Street performers played cheerful music nearby, adding to the atmosphere of curiosity and celebration. Among the crowd, a woman in her mid-40s moved with a sense of urgency. She had traveled from another country and had been waiting for this moment for weeks. Her eyes scanned the formation of the guards, dressed in their iconic red tunics and tall bearskin hats. Each guard stood perfectly still, their posture rigid, their faces expressionless, and their hands resting lightly on their rifles. The precision and discipline of the guards fascinated her, but a growing impatience shadowed her excitement. She had been trying to find the perfect spot to take a photograph. Every time she thought she had positioned herself correctly, another tourist would step in front of her, blocking the shot she wanted. The frustration built slowly at first, then faster, like a wave swelling before it crashes. She muttered under her breath, her gestures becoming more noticeable as she tried to adjust her camera angle again and again. Despite the bustling crowd and the noise of conversations in many languages, she seemed increasingly focused only on her own goal. The crowd around her was large but well-mannered. Most people had come early to secure a spot near the palace gates, and they were careful not to jostle one another. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, excitedly pointing at the guards and whispering questions about their strange black hats. Tourists spoke softly to each other, translating the ceremony for one another and sharing tips about the best angles for photographs. Street vendors offered small souvenirs, from keychains to miniature guards' hats, and the smell of roasted chestnuts mingled with the crisp winter air. As the ceremony began, the guards marched in perfect rhythm, their boots hitting the cobblestones in a synchronized pattern that resonated with every step. The woman followed their movements closely, her camera ready, her fingers tightening around it as she prepared to capture the precise moment she wanted. Each step of the guards seemed both ordinary and extraordinary to her. She admired their discipline and precision, but could not shake the frustration that kept bubbling inside her. She noticed that the guards did not react to the crowd in any way. Even when people jostled or cameras clicked near them, they maintained their composure. Their eyes, straight ahead, seemed to be looking through the crowd rather than at it. The woman had read about this before visiting London, how the royal guards were trained to remain completely still and focused, but seeing it in person was different. It was almost as if they existed in their own world, separate from the chaos of tourists. Her patience, however, was thinning. Every time someone stepped into her line of sight, every time her photo was slightly obstructed, her annoyance grew. She muttered louder, tapping her foot impatiently. She tried shifting from one foot to the other, trying to maneuver into a better position without disturbing others around her. But the crowd was too dense, and each movement she made seemed to attract more attention, yet never gave her the photo she wanted. In that moment of frustration, a thought crossed her mind, a dangerous thought that came from the belief that no one would notice, or that the guards would not react. She had read stories online about tourists getting close to the guards and thought perhaps she could do something small and harmless to gain a better position. It was a miscalculation, a lapse in judgment fueled by her impatience and desire for the perfect shot. Slowly, she moved closer to one of the guards who was standing at the edge of the formation. He was tall, immaculately dressed, and seemed almost larger than life, his bearskin hat towering over his head. His expression was neutral, perfectly calm, his hands resting lightly on the rifle that gleamed under the sunlight. The woman, thinking that a small action would go unnoticed, reached out impulsively and struck the guard lightly. It was not a violent blow, but enough to make contact. The crowd immediately reacted. Gasps spread like ripples through the people standing nearby. Phones were raised instantly to record what had happened. Some spectators froze, shocked that anyone would dare to touch one of the royal guards. Others whispered among themselves, questioning why the woman would act so impulsively. Children stared wide-eyed, unsure whether what they had just seen was acceptable or not. The guard did not flinch, did not react in anger, and did not speak. He remained perfectly still, his posture unchanged, his eyes still forward. To the woman's surprise, he did not retaliate or show even the slightest irritation. The people around her seemed equally surprised, as if expecting some immediate reaction. But the guard continued to stand calmly, as if nothing had happened at all. Security personnel nearby quickly noticed the incident. Two uniformed officers began moving toward the woman, their pace brisk but controlled. They were trained to handle such situations, to maintain order without escalating tensions, and their expressions reflected their experience. Yet the guard, without a word, subtly signaled them to pause. His hand lifted slightly, a silent gesture of control, and the officers hesitated. The woman, seeing the attention she had drawn, felt a sudden wave of shame and confusion. The crowd began to murmur, speculating about what would happen next. Some whispered that the woman would be arrested, others that the guard would finally react, and some expressed admiration for his patience. Cameras continued to click, capturing not only the woman's mistake, but also the guard's remarkable composure. What could have been an embarrassing or frightening moment for the guard was instead met with extraordinary calmness. As the seconds stretched on, the woman's initial bravado began to fade. She realized that her assumption, that the guard would stay quiet and not react, was dangerously wrong. The calmness of the guard, which had initially seemed like indifference, carried a silent authority that spoke louder than words. Every person watching could feel the weight of his presence, the discipline that had been instilled through rigorous training, and the unspoken message that rules and respect mattered more than impulsive actions. At that moment, it became clear to everyone present that this was no ordinary encounter. The royal guard's silence was not a weakness. It was a demonstration of control, patience, and professionalism. And the woman, who had acted out of frustration and desire for a perfect photo, began to understand the gravity of her actions. She stood frozen, realizing that the world around her was watching, and that the consequences of her impulsive decision could be more serious than she had anticipated. The moment stretched on as the crowd tried to process what had just happened. Whispers rippled through the gathered tourists, a mixture of shock, curiosity, and admiration. Nobody expected someone to actually strike a British royal guard, even lightly, and even fewer expected that the guard would remain completely still. Cameras were raised, capturing every second, as if everyone instinctively knew they were witnessing something unusual, something that would later be retold as a story of restraint and composure. The woman, whose impulsive action had caused the stir, began to feel the first pangs of real panic. Her face flushed red, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her camera. She had imagined that no one would notice, that perhaps she could get her perfect photo without anyone reacting. But the reality was entirely different. She realized the entire area was now focused on her. Security personnel, tourists, and even the guards in formation had taken note of the incident. The weight of attention pressed on her, making her small in the midst of the crowd. Nearby, a group of tourists whispered to one another, pointing discreetly toward the woman. "Can you believe she actually hit him?" one asked in disbelief, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought they were supposed to be untouchable," another added, eyes wide. Children who had been watching the ceremony excitedly now turned to their parents, unsure of how to respond. Some mimicked the action with their tiny hands, while others asked innocent, confused questions about why someone would hit a guard. The royal guard, however, did not move. He remained a figure of unwavering calm, his tall bearskin hat towering above his shoulders, his red tunic immaculate despite the close contact. His eyes, forward and unflinching, gave nothing away. There was no flicker of anger, no sign of irritation, and no acknowledgement of the woman's act beyond the slight tilt of his head toward the crowd. He was the embodiment of discipline, a living demonstration of the training that the guards undergo every day. Security staff approached carefully, moving with quiet authority. Their uniforms were crisp, and their movements were professional, calculated to ensure safety without creating panic. They had been trained to handle disturbances without escalating the situation. One officer gently touched the woman's elbow, signaling for her to step aside, but she hesitated. Her mind raced, thinking of excuses, apologies, and explanations all at once. Her voice caught in her throat, leaving her momentarily speechless. The crowd's reaction grew more animated. Phones clicked and cameras swiveled to capture every angle of the incident. Some onlookers whispered warnings to the woman, urging her to apologize or step back, while others simply observed, fascinated by the unexpected drama. The air was filled with murmurs of astonishment and curiosity. Even tourists who had come for the changing of the guard ceremony were now watching a real-life event unfold, one that no travel guide had prepared them for. For the woman, embarrassment and fear collided with frustration. She had come to London with dreams of capturing the perfect photo, of creating memories she could share with friends and family. Instead, she found herself at the center of a moment she had never intended. Every step she had taken toward the guard now seemed reckless in hindsight. She realized that her assumption, that the guard would simply stay quiet, was dangerously naive. As she stood frozen, the guard maintained his position. The calmness was almost surreal, as if time itself had slowed down around him. His silence was not passive, it was purposeful. Each second he remained still communicated more authority than any words could. The woman felt the weight of his presence, a silent reminder that some roles in life demanded patience, dignity, and control above all else. People in the crowd began to reflect aloud on the situation. "He's incredible," one tourist murmured to another. "Not even a twitch. I can't imagine standing like that for hours, let alone after being hit." Another added, "It's like he's untouchable. Not just because of the uniform, but because of who he is and what he represents." Even strangers, previously absorbed in their own worlds and cameras, now shared a moment of collective admiration for the guard's composure. Meanwhile, the woman tried to explain herself, but her words stumbled awkwardly. I just wanted a picture," she mumbled, her voice barely audible above the murmurs of the crowd. Her gestures were frantic, as if she could somehow rewind the moment or undo what she had done. Security officers continued to guide her away from the formation, speaking in calm but firm tones. She finally stepped back, her camera dangling from her hands, realizing that no photo was worth the attention and consequences she now faced. The guard's behavior, however, continued to surprise everyone. He did not demand an apology. He did not react angrily. Instead, he simply remained where he was, holding his position with perfect posture. His eyes remained focused straight ahead, yet there was an unmistakable aura of authority. It was a reminder that discipline and self-control often speak louder than words or actions. The crowd watched in awe, recognizing that this was a demonstration of the extraordinary training and commitment required to serve as a royal guard. For the spectators, the moment had shifted from a minor incident to a lesson in composure and respect. Some tourists whispered about how easy it would have been for the guard to react with anger or frustration, but he had chosen a different path. Children were quietly observing, learning in their own way that patience and calmness could sometimes achieve far more than impulsive action. Even adults found themselves reflecting on their own behavior and the expectations of civility in public spaces. The woman, now escorted to a quieter area, began to comprehend the situation fully. Her initial frustration had clouded her judgment, and she now saw the consequences of her impulsive action. She noticed the stares of other tourists, the glances of security officers, and the lingering admiration for the guard's discipline. Each of these observations weighed on her, reminding her that her assumptions about the guard's silence had been misguided. The incident quickly became a subject of discussion among the crowd. Conversations buzzed with questions and commentary. How did the guard manage to stay calm? What would have happened if he had reacted differently? Why did the woman think she could act impulsively? The answers were not immediately clear, but the event itself left a lasting impression. It was not just a story about a tourist and a guard. It was a story about patience, professionalism, and human behavior under unexpected circumstances. As security guided the woman away from the area, the guard finally shifted slightly, resuming his duties with the same calm and precision as before. The crowd's attention slowly returned to the ceremony, but the memory of the incident lingered. People continued to take photos, not just of the guard in his uniform, but of the scene that had unfolded before them. The story, they knew, would be shared widely, a reminder of the remarkable restraint displayed in the face of provocation. Even after the immediate tension had passed, the atmosphere near the palace gates remained charged with energy. Tourists exchanged their own accounts of what they had witnessed. Children described the guard as a superhero to their parents. Adults recounted the sequence of events to friends in hushed tones, emphasizing the discipline and patience they had seen. In that moment, the lesson was clear. Composure could be more powerful than confrontation, and respect for roles, rules, and others was a strength, not a limitation. For the woman, the experience was humbling. She realized that a simple assumption, that the guard would stay quiet no matter what, was completely wrong. Her action had been noticed, documented, and judged by everyone around her. Yet, instead of punishment or humiliation, she found herself face to face with the quiet authority of someone who had chosen patience over reaction. It was a moment that would stay with her for the rest of her life, a reminder of the importance of self-control, respect, and humility. By the end of the ceremony, the crowd slowly dispersed, still talking animatedly about the incident. The royal guard continued his duties, unchanged, unaffected by the brief disturbance. Tourists resumed taking photos and enjoying the spectacle, but a quiet respect lingered in the air. The story of the woman and the guard had become more than an isolated event. It had become a shared experience, one that would be recounted for its lessons in restraint, professionalism, and the unexpected power of calmness. The moments following the incident remained tense, but the royal guard's calm presence began to shift the focus from the woman's impulsive action to the unexpected response of the guard. For the onlookers, what happened next was both surprising and inspiring. Rather than escalating the situation or allowing anger to take over, the guard began to take careful steps forward, his movements deliberate and measured. Every eye in the crowd followed him, captivated by a scene that felt like it had stepped out of history books. He stopped just a few feet from the woman, standing tall and perfectly composed. His eyes, which had remained straight ahead until now, finally flicked toward her. Yet there was no expression of rage or contempt. Instead, his face carried an air of authority combined with quiet dignity. His voice, when he finally spoke, was steady, clear, and calm, commanding attention without a single shout. "Ma'am," he said softly, but with enough presence that the entire area seemed to pause, "please understand the seriousness of your actions." The woman froze. The words themselves were not harsh or punishing, but the weight behind them made her heart pound. She realized that the guard's calm voice held more power than any angry shout could have. He continued, explaining that his role as a royal guard was more than a uniform or ceremonial duty. It was a commitment to discipline, respect, and service. He described how touching a guard, even lightly, could have consequences not just for the individual, but for the tradition and safety he represented. People in the crowd leaned in slightly, listening with fascination. Many had expected the guard to remain silent, or perhaps to step back and wait for security to intervene. Instead, he was addressing the woman directly, speaking to her with authority and clarity, yet without aggression. The contrast between the potential for chaos and the guard's measured response created a palpable tension in the air, an energy that was almost electric, drawing the attention of everyone present. The woman's initial embarrassment grew into a mixture of shock and awe. She had assumed that no one would react, that the guard's stoicism would remain unbroken. She had expected silence, perhaps even indifference. Instead, she found herself confronted with a calm authority that forced her to reconsider her actions. Her camera now felt heavy in her hands, as if it were a symbol of her misplaced priorities. She had come for a perfect photo, but instead received a lesson she could never forget. The crowd around them murmured in admiration. Some whispered to one another about the guard's poise, noting how he maintained control without the need for anger or punishment. Others reflected on the contrast between the impulsive woman and the composed guard. "It's amazing how calm he is," one tourist said, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of conversation. "I would have lost my temper long ago." Children, curious as ever, stared with wide eyes, sensing that something important was happening, though they could not fully understand the gravity of the situation. The guard continued, his words measured and deliberate. He explained the significance of his role and why discipline was essential, not only for himself, but for the integrity of the institution he served. He spoke about tradition, responsibility, and the importance of self-control, showing that maintaining composure in difficult situations was a sign of strength rather than weakness. Every word he spoke seemed to resonate beyond the immediate audience, sending a message that would linger in the minds of those present long after the ceremony ended. For the woman, the effect was immediate and profound. Her face remained red, not only from embarrassment but from the realization that she had misjudged the situation entirely. Each word from the guard cut through the fog of frustration and impatience that had led her to act impulsively. She tried to form a response, a small apology, but her voice caught in her throat. The authority of the guard was not oppressive, it was illuminating. It highlighted her mistake in a way that demanded reflection and humility rather than confrontation. The security officers, standing nearby, remained alert but relaxed, recognizing that the guard's presence and words had already diffused the potential tension. They watched as the woman's posture shifted, her shoulders slumping slightly in acknowledgement of her error. It was clear that the guard's calm and direct response had achieved more than any immediate disciplinary action could have. The situation, which had begun as a small act of impulsiveness, had transformed into a quiet but powerful lesson in behavior and respect. The crowd's reactions reflected the unusual nature of the event. Some people whispered praises for the guard's patience and composure. Others discussed how rare it was to see authority exercised with both firmness and kindness. Even those who had initially judged the woman harshly began to recognize that the moment had evolved into something meaningful. It was no longer just about an impulsive action. It had become a story of restraint, professionalism, and the subtle power of calm authority. The woman's thoughts raced as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. She thought about the photo she had wanted, the frustration that had driven her action, and the unexpected response she had received. Slowly, a sense of humility replaced her panic. She realized that the guard's calm approach was far more impactful than any reaction she had anticipated. It was a lesson in respect and patience, one that she knew she would carry with her forever. The royal guard, noticing her acknowledgement, did not press further. His eyes returned to their forward focus, and his posture remained unwavering. There was no need for further words. The message had been conveyed. The woman, now fully aware of the gravity of her actions, stepped back and lowered her camera. The energy in the crowd shifted again, from tension to admiration and reflection. People began to resume their positions to watch the ceremony, but the memory of the interaction lingered like a quiet echo. For the crowd, the scene was unforgettable. Tourists who had come for photos and sightseeing found themselves witnessing something far more significant, a real-life example of patience, authority, and dignity in action. Phones and cameras continued to click, but now they were capturing more than just ceremonial uniforms and synchronized movements. They were documenting a moment that would later be remembered for its extraordinary lessons. Some onlookers quietly commented to each other about what they had seen. "It's incredible," one woman said softly. "He could have reacted angrily, but he didn't. That takes more strength than anyone can imagine." Another added, "It's like he's teaching everyone, without even trying, about respect and patience. You can see it in how he stands." Even children, observing quietly, seemed to sense the weight of the moment, learning through observation that authority exercised with calmness could leave a lasting impression. The woman, now escorted slightly away from the formation by security personnel, felt a mixture of relief and gratitude. Relief that the situation had not escalated further, and gratitude for the unexpected way the guard had addressed her. His calmness had prevented humiliation or punishment, while still conveying the seriousness of her actions. She realized that she had been given a rare opportunity to learn about respect, patience, and the unspoken power of composure in public spaces. As the ceremony continued around them, the guard returned to his position, perfectly composed, as if the brief disruption had never occurred. The crowd slowly refocused on the marching guards, the music, and the rhythmic precision of the ceremony. Yet in the minds of everyone present, the moment of confrontation remained vivid. It had become more than a minor incident. It had become a shared experience that illustrated human behavior, discipline, and the quiet strength of self-control. The woman's perspective began to shift even further. She reflected on the assumptions that had led her to act impulsively, on the momentary desire to capture a perfect image, and on the unexpected consequences of her choices. She understood now that patience, respect, and awareness of others were far more valuable than any photograph could ever be. It was a lesson she knew she would carry with her long after she returned home, a memory that would always remind her of the importance of composure and humility. The crowd dispersed gradually as the ceremony concluded, but discussions continued in hushed tones. People shared their own interpretations of what had occurred, highlighting the guard's remarkable discipline and the woman's moment of learning. Children excitedly recounted the story to their parents, often exaggerating details, yet capturing the essence of the lesson. Patience and respect mattered, and calm authority could teach more than words alone. For the woman, the final moments of Part 3 were deeply reflective. She understood that her action, impulsive and thoughtless as it had been, had resulted in an extraordinary lesson. She had assumed that silence equaled weakness, that the guard would do nothing, but she was wrong. The guard's measured response had shown that strength is not always loud or aggressive. It can be quiet, composed, and powerful in its restraint. In the days that followed, those who had witnessed the event shared their stories with friends, family, and even on social media. The narrative spread quickly, emphasizing not only the woman's impulsive action, but also the guard's remarkable patience. The lesson was clear. Discipline and composure can influence behavior and teach lessons in ways that anger and confrontation never could. By the time the woman left the palace grounds, she had gained something far more valuable than the photograph she had sought. She carried with her an understanding of respect, patience, and the quiet power of composure, lessons delivered not through punishment, but through example. The royal guard had transformed a moment of conflict into a moment of learning, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. After the guard had returned to his post, the atmosphere around Buckingham Palace remained charged with a quiet tension. The crowd was no longer just observing a ceremonial event. They had witnessed something extraordinary. The woman, escorted slightly away by security, could feel all eyes on her. Though no one shouted or pointed directly, the weight of their attention was unmistakable. She had acted impulsively, but the outcome had shown her that even a small moment could carry significance far beyond what she had imagined. The security officers, while maintaining their professional composure, spoke quietly to the woman, reminding her of the rules regarding the royal guards and public conduct. She listened carefully, absorbing every word. It was not a scolding in the usual sense, but a firm explanation of responsibility and civility. She nodded repeatedly, the embarrassment on her face now mingled with a sense of humility. The lessons of the day were sinking in, and she realized that this was no ordinary encounter. Nearby, the crowd continued to murmur among themselves. Tourists exchanged their observations, marveling at the guard's calm response. Some had expected him to react sharply, but instead, he had chosen patience and direct communication. "I've never seen such composure," one man whispered. Even after being struck, he didn't lose control. "That takes real discipline." A young woman holding her child close added softly, "It's amazing to see how calm he remained. That's the kind of strength we should all aspire to." The woman's perspective continued to shift. She realized that her initial desire, to capture a perfect photograph, had blinded her to the importance of respect and order. She had assumed that a small action would go unnoticed, that the guard's silence meant tolerance or weakness. Instead, she had learned that composure, patience, and awareness carry far more power than any impulsive act. She looked at the guard from a distance, noticing the perfection of his posture, the focus in his eyes, and the subtle authority in his presence. Every detail seemed to communicate a silent lesson. Restraint is strength, and respect matters. Security guided her to a quieter area away from the main crowd, giving her space to calm down. She took a deep breath, trying to collect her thoughts. Her hands shook slightly, and she could feel the camera strap digging into her wrist, a reminder of the obsession that had led to the incident. She reflected on the crowd's reactions, on the whispers and murmurs, and on the silent admiration for the guard's discipline. It was a humbling experience, one that made her reconsider not only her actions, but also her approach to situations in general. The royal guard, meanwhile, had resumed his duties without any visible sign of the brief disturbance. He continued to march in precise rhythm with his fellow guards, his posture impeccable, his focus unwavering. To anyone watching, it was as though nothing had happened. Yet, for those who had witnessed the incident closely, it was clear that this moment would not be easily forgotten. The guard's calm response had not only maintained order, but had also imparted a subtle lesson in self-control and dignity. As the ceremony progressed, the crowd began to engage in quiet reflection. People discussed how rare it was to see such restraint. "It's incredible," one tourist said. "He could have reacted angrily, but instead he used calm authority to show her the consequences of her action." "That's real strength," another added. "I think this will stick with her forever." It's a lesson in humility and respect, something you can't teach in a classroom. Children observed in silence, absorbing the lesson in their own way, their young minds learning about patience and composure through what they had seen. The woman's embarrassment gradually transformed into a deeper understanding. She realized that her action, though impulsive, had become a moment of learning. She understood now that assumptions about others, especially those in positions of responsibility, could be dangerously misleading. Her initial thought, that the guard would remain quiet no matter what, had been naive. She had misjudged the discipline and authority required to serve in such a role. Security officers continued to provide guidance, explaining the formal consequences that could have arisen from her action. They spoke calmly, emphasizing that the intent of the guidance was educational rather than punitive. The woman listened, nodding, and reflected on the importance of public behavior, respect for traditions, and the responsibilities inherent in spaces of historical and cultural significance. She began to appreciate the structure and discipline that allowed the guards to perform their duties flawlessly day after day, regardless of distractions or provocations. Observers in the crowd began to discuss how this single incident had revealed the human qualities behind the ceremonial roles. "It's easy to see the uniform and assume it's just a show," one man said. "But today, we've seen the dedication, patience, and composure it takes to hold that position. That's more inspiring than any photo." Others agreed, noting that the lesson extended beyond the palace gates. It was a reminder of how calmness and professionalism can diffuse conflict and influence others positively, even in unexpected situations. The woman's thoughts drifted to her own life beyond the palace grounds. She considered how often impatience and frustration had influenced her decisions. She realized that small, impulsive actions, though seemingly insignificant at the moment, could have consequences she had not considered. The guard's response had been a model of measured authority, showing her that calm and thoughtful reactions could create more meaningful outcomes than reactive or emotional responses. Meanwhile, the royal guard continued to perform his duties with meticulous precision. Every step, every turn, every adjustment in posture was carried out with attention to detail. His focus and discipline reinforced the lessons of the day, that excellence, respect, and self-control are not optional. They are expected in the roles they had chosen to serve. The crowd watched in quiet admiration, understanding that what they had witnessed was both rare and valuable. The woman, now more composed, looked around and noticed the subtle reactions of others in the crowd. Some smiled knowingly, appreciating the moment as an unexpected lesson. Others whispered in hushed tones, remarking on how unusual it was to see authority exercised with such calmness and restraint. She felt a sense of relief mixed with gratitude. The experience had taught her more than she could have imagined before arriving at the palace. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, the crowd began to disperse slowly. Tourists exchanged stories and observations, recounting the guard's calmness and the woman's impulsive act. Children skipped along, repeating phrases they had overheard, and adults continued to reflect on the subtle but powerful lessons they had witnessed. The day, intended as a routine tourist experience, had become an unforgettable lesson in patience, respect, and the impact of composed authority. The woman's reflections deepened as she walked away from the palace. She thought about the assumptions that had led her to act hastily, about the frustration that had clouded her judgment, and about the quiet authority that had corrected her behavior without anger or humiliation. She realized that moments like these, though brief, could leave lasting impressions. They could teach lessons that textbooks could not, lessons learned through observation, experience, and reflection. By the time she left the palace grounds, the woman felt transformed. What had begun as a minor incident had turned into an opportunity for personal growth. She had learned about the importance of patience, the value of respect, and the quiet power of self-control. The royal guard, by remaining composed and professional, had demonstrated that authority exercised thoughtfully can educate, inspire and guide others without the need for confrontation. Observers who had witnessed the incident continued to recount the story long after leaving the palace. They shared it with friends, family, and fellow tourists, highlighting the lesson in restraint and professionalism. The woman herself would carry the memory with her, a reminder that impulsive actions can have consequences, and that calm, deliberate responses often leave the deepest impact. Even as life returned to its normal rhythm around Buckingham Palace, the story of the woman and the royal guard remained a subtle but powerful lesson for everyone present. It was not merely an incident of a tourist's impulsive act. It had become an example of human behavior, discipline, and the extraordinary effect of patience and composure. The woman, once frustrated and impulsive, now walked away with a deep understanding of respect, humility, and the enduring power of quiet authority. As the afternoon sunlight began to fade over Buckingham Palace, the crowd started to thin, but the energy of what had just happened lingered in the air. The woman, now calmer and more reflective, walked slowly through the nearby square, her thoughts swirling with the lessons of the day. She had arrived eager for a photograph, expecting nothing more than the routine spectacle of the changing of the guard. Instead, she had experienced something far more profound, a lesson in respect, patience, and the quiet authority of discipline. Around her, tourists continued to linger, recounting the event to one another in hushed tones. The story had already begun to take on the feel of legend among the onlookers. People described how the woman had struck the guard, how the guard had reacted with calm authority, and how the crowd had held its collective breath as a lesson unfolded before their eyes. Children pointed at the royal guards with awe, recounting the incident to their parents, while adults reflected on the power of composure and patience in a world that often favored quick reactions and impulsive behavior. The woman could still see the guard in her mind's eye, standing tall and unflinching, his posture perfect, his focus unwavering. She remembered the way he had spoken to her, not with anger or judgment, but with calm, deliberate words that conveyed the seriousness of her action without humiliating her. She realized that in that moment, he had not only maintained his professional duties, but had also taught a lesson that no amount of reprimanding or punishment could have achieved. The depth of his restraint struck her profoundly. Security officers had escorted her to a quieter area earlier, giving her space to compose herself. During that time, she had thought deeply about her behavior and the consequences of her impulsive action. She realized that her desire for the perfect photograph had blinded her to the importance of patience and consideration for others. The incident had shown her that assumptions about people, particularly those trained in discipline and authority, could be dangerously misleading. She now understood that respect and awareness were far more important than achieving personal satisfaction in a fleeting moment. As the crowd began to disperse, she noticed that many people were still talking about the guard's response. Tourists shared their interpretations of the event, highlighting the strength it took to remain composed under provocation. Some marveled at how the guard had maintained professionalism despite being physically touched without permission. Others discussed how the incident had become a teaching moment not only for the woman but for everyone present. It was a reminder that the true power of authority lay in the ability to remain calm, even when challenged. The woman took a deep breath and reflected on her own reaction earlier. She had felt impatience, frustration, and entitlement, assuming that the rules would bend to accommodate her desires. Yet the guard's response had shattered those assumptions. By staying calm, he had shown her that discipline was not just about standing still in uniform. It was about self-control, responsibility, and the respect one holds for one's duties and the people around them. The lesson was clear. True authority comes from composure, not aggression. For the spectators, the event had created an unexpected sense of unity. Strangers who had come to watch a ceremony were now connected by a shared experience. They had witnessed firsthand how a single act of impulsiveness could be transformed into a lesson in patience and respect by someone who understood the power of self-control. Conversations in the crowd were filled with admiration for the guard, as people acknowledged the quiet but powerful effect of his actions. Many commented on how rare it was to see someone exercise authority so thoughtfully, emphasizing that calmness could have a far greater impact than force or anger. The woman's embarrassment began to transform into gratitude. She realized that the guard's calm demeanor had given her the chance to reflect on her own behavior, to recognize her mistake, and to learn from it without facing public humiliation or punishment. She felt a sense of relief that the situation had been handled so gracefully, and a deep appreciation for the professionalism and discipline of those who serve in such demanding roles. She also recognized that the lesson extended beyond this single incident. It was applicable to her everyday life, reminding her that patience, composure, and respect were essential in all interactions. As she walked further away from the palace gates, she noticed other visitors who had witnessed the event taking photographs of the guard. But these photographs were different now. They captured more than just the ceremonial uniform and precise movements. They captured a moment of extraordinary human behavior, discipline, patience, and composure under pressure. The woman realized that her earlier obsession with taking a perfect photo had been shallow compared to the deeper understanding she had gained from observing this real-life lesson. The guard, unaware of the ripple effect of his actions, continued his duties with impeccable precision. Every movement, every turn, every adjustment in posture reflected years of training, dedication, and discipline. He had remained calm not only because it was expected of him, but because it was a conscious choice, one that had shaped the experience of everyone around him. In that simple act of composure, he had taught lessons in patience, respect, and self-control that would resonate far longer than the brief incident itself. Back in the crowd, conversations turned to reflection. People discussed the value of restraint, the importance of professionalism, and the unexpected power of calm authority. Children, inspired by what they had seen, repeated phrases like "stay calm" and "be patient" to their parents. Adults pondered how often they had acted impulsively in their own lives, and considered the value of pausing, thinking, and responding with thoughtfulness rather than emotion. The incident had transcended its immediate circumstances to become a symbol of behavior, discipline, and respect. The woman continued to walk slowly, replaying the events in her mind. She thought about the assumptions that had led to her impulsive act and realized how quickly frustration and impatience could cloud judgment. She understood that the guard's silence had not been weakness, and his calm had not been indifference. Instead, it was a deliberate, conscious choice to respond with dignity, professionalism, and authority. She felt a sense of humility and a newfound respect for the responsibilities carried by those in roles of authority. Even after leaving the palace grounds, the woman knew the story would stay with her. She imagined recounting it to friends and family, not as a tale of embarrassment, but as a story of personal growth. She thought about the lessons she had learned, patience, respect, and the quiet power of composure, and how they could influence her behavior in the future. The incident had transformed from a moment of impulsive action into an enduring life lesson. For the royal guard, the day continued as it always did. To him, it was another event in a long line of ceremonies, each requiring the same level of discipline and focus. Yet, for those who had witnessed the incident, it had become something extraordinary. His calmness and professionalism had left an indelible impression on the crowd, demonstrating that true authority and strength are expressed not through force, but through restraint, patience, and dignity. The woman finally reached a quiet street near the palace and paused to gather her thoughts. She reflected on how a single moment could carry so much meaning, and how one person's choice to remain composed had created a ripple effect that touched dozens of people around her. She realized that the lessons of the day were not limited to public ceremonies. They applied to everyday life, to work, relationships, and personal growth. She had been reminded that patience, thoughtfulness, and respect are qualities that create lasting impressions far beyond what any photograph could capture. As evening fell, the crowd that remained at Buckingham Palace gradually dispersed, but conversations about the incident continued. Tourists, locals, and even street vendors discussed the guard's response, emphasizing the extraordinary composure he had displayed. The story spread naturally, as people shared what they had witnessed and reflected on the lessons learned. The woman herself carried a deep sense of humility, understanding that she had been given a rare opportunity to see human discipline in action, and that she had been part of a moment that would remain memorable for everyone involved. The guard's calm authority had achieved more than anyone could have anticipated. It had transformed a moment of impulsiveness into a lesson in patience, respect, and personal growth. The woman had assumed silence meant weakness, but she now understood the opposite. True strength, she realized, lies in composure, in the ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. The incident had become a story not of embarrassment, but of learning, reflection, and quiet triumph. By the end of the day, the woman had internalized the lessons she had witnessed. She felt gratitude for the unexpected way the guard had addressed her mistake, admiration for his discipline, and a renewed understanding of the importance of patience and respect. The incident, which began with a moment of impulsiveness, had ended with profound insight, leaving a lasting impact on everyone who had been present. As the sun set over London, she walked away from Buckingham Palace with a sense of calm and reflection. The perfect photograph she had once sought seemed trivial compared to the lesson she had received. She had been given a unique opportunity to witness discipline, professionalism, and quiet authority in action, and she knew that the memory of this day would stay with her forever. The story, she realized, was not just about her mistake. It was about the extraordinary power of patience, the importance of respect, and the lasting impression of composure in the face of impulsive behavior. The woman had expected a routine tourist experience, but what she gained instead was far more valuable. She had learned that small actions can have unexpected consequences, that discipline and composure are powerful tools, and that respect is a quality that shapes interactions and leaves lasting impressions. Buckingham Palace would always be remembered for its history and ceremonies, but for her, it would also be remembered as the place where she witnessed the quiet strength of a royal guard and learned lessons she would carry for the rest of her life.